Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Foxpunter Manager Profiling. Today we'll be focusing on two more titans of the technical area, and we'll be using the myers-briggs model to help us analyse and psychologically profile a couple more gaffers from across the Premier League and the EFL. If you like what you hear over the next 45 minutes, please do like and subscribe. And if you fancy yourself as a bit of a wordsmith, then why not write us a review as well? This is our final episode of 2020, and if you do have time over the festive period, you may wish to go back and listen to some of our previous 9 episodes. We've already put the spotlight on the likes of Pep Guardiola, Marcelo Bielsa, Neil Harris, and Chris Hughton, amongst others. So, as this is our final episode of the year, this is essentially our podcast Christmas party, and helping me to polish off the buffet is Foxpunter's Mike Holden. Mike, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Jack. Very, very busy weekend with the changes and the goings on. Straight after the final whistle yesterday.
Yeah, we've got loads to discuss. And once again, if you'd asked me this 24 hours ago, we wouldn't have had much in this section. But after a 2-0 defeat to Huddersfield, it is we're waving bye-bye to Vladimir Evitch of Watford. And it feels, Mike, that we've hardly got to know him.
No, well, I've actually spent quite a bit of time studying him over the summer because I was curious to how quick I could get a handle on somebody that, wasn't well known on these shores. And I think they've made a mistake because I think they brought in the right manager for the job that needed to be done at Watford. And the first sign of pressure at the job that Ivic, I believe, was brought to do, they've wilted. The club have wilted and they've backed down to the player power and over the manager. And I just think that's the problem in a nutshell.
Well, it's quite a quick turnaround, isn't it? And I mean, that's what Watford do. A real conveyor belt of managers. Clearly, the struggle, as you alluded to there, was between Troy Deeney and Vladimir Ivic. That's what the media are making it out to be. I'm sure there are probably other players involved as well. But Troy Deeney not involved at the weekend, and that essentially was the final straw, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure. I think Troy Deeney's certainly the leader. I think that's quite evident. And even the fact of how outspoken Deeney was over the Pearson appointment last season. I think it's quite evident that Deeney calls a lot of the shots at that club and what goes on behind the scenes, and he's kind of got a grip on that dressing room to a greater degree than most club captains would at any club. So I think this was all pretty evident in the summer, and I'm looking at the type of manager you're bringing in. You're looking at the potential changes that are going to happen in the transfer window as the window's closing and the timing of the window after the season started. And you're thinking, right, whoever comes in's got a real job on their hands. And what's happened is, I think Ivic has played it well in the sense that he's just said, right, if you're not part of the group now, you go and do and discuss your contracts and do what you feel like you need to do. If you can get your move back to the Premier League, then that's fine. I'll cope with it. When you come back, I'll bring you back into the group and we'll start afresh. With you or without you, I'm easy either way. So these players have all gone off for their moves, and I think it's players plural. I don't think it's just Deeney, but Deeney's obviously the headline here. So he's gone away looking for his move. He's not managed to negotiate the move that suits him, so he's come back into the group. And I just think at that stage, the players who were part of the group at the beginning of the season were behind Ivic. And I think what we need to do is we need to separate here what we're talking about. Are we talking about the quality of the football that Watford are playing and how good they are as a football team right now? Or are we talking about the situation that Ivic has got to manage in terms of that dressing room? And I think the priority is the situation. You get on top of the situation, you get your hands around it, and you get a control of that football club again. Deeney's 32 now. What's he really got to offer Watford in the coming years? He could be gone in 2 weeks in January. There's a transfer window just round the corner. You're so close to that window, getting him out of the door and moving on and starting a new chapter. I just can't believe they've sacked him because I believe that as far as the situation goes, they've appointed a strong man. He's a real sort of army commander type manager. And I've heard people say in the aftermath of yesterday that they feel sorry for Ivic in all of this. And it's like, don't feel sorry for Ivic. Ivic is going to be absolutely fine. He's losing no sleep over any of this. But you've got so close to the January transfer window now, and then you've done away with the guy who was going to fix it all for you. And that's just, I'm just really, really shocked by it because, like I say, these two separate things. We know the football's not been brilliant, but it's been controlled, and Watford have been getting results in spite of the limitations up to this point. But over time, I believe that Ivic was going to put down a blueprint and a style of football that would increasingly become self-evident over time, and Watford would get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, their away form certainly a concern. Their ability to score and create chances away from home, a real problem. But despite that, they were still right up there at the top of the championship. So, like you say, it does seem curious that they've bowed this player power. Now, in terms of the replacement, Troy Deeney will probably take his place in the boardroom, I imagine, to conduct the interviews. Eddie Howe has been linked, of course, and Slaven Bilic, we'll talk more about later on in the podcast. Also, of course, his name's going to be thrown into the ring due to him being available now. But the just have a look here. The favourite at the moment is Dinamo Tbilisi's boss, Zisco Munoz, who we don't know much about at the moment. But Mike, there's a little assignment for you if he does get the job, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Looking forward to that one, but for me, I think the big question here is not about the replacement; it's about what's going on at boardroom level. Because I think not only I'll be honest, there was a bit of a boardroom reshuffle in the summer where the sporting director became the football director and new chief executive. Or there was a little bit of a rejig in the summer. And I looked at the appointment and job that needed doing and thinking, yeah, it's a solid appointment. I can see, I don't know much about Ivic on a football level. How much can you translate achievements in Israel to achievements in the championship? We don't know. But in terms of the type of character he is and the type of personality and the job that he needed to do, I'm thinking, yeah, this is a solid appointment. This guy is going to get stuff done and nobody's going to cross him and win a battle. And yet the first and main battle that he had this weekend with Troy Deeney, the board have just wilted, and he's still the strong man. He leaves with his head held high. He did the job. He was true to his type. He came in and did what he's all about. And in terms of not shirking the question in the interview yesterday, these are not Premier League players anymore. Even if they think they are, they're not. Get used to being in the Championship because that's what you are. And I just think he's handled it as strongly as I expected him to. He's exactly, he's exactly everything that Watford appointed. But the first sign of pressure coming from that dressing room, where they're going over Ivic's head to the boardroom or to, spitting the dummy out, they've just wilted and sacked him. And I just think it's really worrying for Watford in terms of how you deal with the relegation and where they go from here.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens over the coming weeks. As you say, I'm pretty sure Ivic's reputation has taken absolutely no battering whatsoever, and he'll bounce back and get plenty more jobs across Europe. And I look forward to our 60-minute Zisco Munoz special in the new year, Mike, counting down the hours until we record that. And let's move on to our main source today, the man that we're talking about. He is also back in the game. He's had a bit of time out. He's done a bit of punditry in the interim period. He's a very, very well-known figure, and he's taken on another job at the bottom of the Premier League. We are, of course, talking Sam Allardyce, who replaced Slaven Bilic earlier this week. Now, Big Sam is usually brought in to make sides tougher to beat, to make them pick up points, often against the odds. But I felt as though, barring the defeat to Palace, where they, of course, went down to 10 men anyway, I felt as though Bilic was kind of just turning the tide a little bit and making the Baggies much tougher to break down. What do you make of the sacking?
Yeah, I think they've been competitive of late. I think they've been competitive all season, but I guess it's one of those that once you get back to the Premier League, results are everything. And in the realm of fine margins, I'm not sure Bilic was a reliable sort. That I don't think. There was obvious evidence that results were going to turn and there was going to be a massive turnaround. He's just keeping games within the realm of fine margins and have been quite unlucky. But it's a results business. You get back to the Premier League and you can be a long time coming back if you don't make the most of this opportunity. We've seen it time and time again. Clubs in this position get to around Christmas time, January window just round the corner, especially when it's a manager who's got a track record for being able to attract players and make business happen quickly. Which Allardyce falls into that category. He's available already. I think even in October, clubs towards the bottom are well aware that Sam Allardyce is available if things aren't going according to plan. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise from that score. I think also what should be said here, I think Bilic leaves with his head held high because of the result at Manchester City. And I think it was quite typical of Bilic And West Brom this season, that some of the best performances have arrived against the top teams. I think back to the 1-0 late 1-0 defeat at home to Tottenham, 1-0 defeat at Manchester United away, and the 1-1 draw at City in midweek. Because I think he's very much an underdog manager. I think he's very much about the motivational side, and he likes a story, an underdog story, and he's able to tap into something from players to believe that when you're on a bit of a hide into nothing, you get something out of players in those scenarios. But at the end of last season, I have to say, I think West Brom were lucky to get out of the Championship, because when the moment of truth arrived, they couldn't handle the pressure. And I think Bilic struggled to get those players over the line with the pressure. It was just lucky for them that Brentford choked as well in a very similar way when the pressure was shifted over to them. So I don't think it was an overly convincing promotion campaign, but he's got that on his CV now, so fair play to him. And I just think, I think Sam Allardyce is available and results are not quite what they should be. I'm not surprised that the change has happened.
Is it with the January transfer window in mind, do you think? Are they going to give Sam a bit of cash to splash? Because they didn't go particularly all out in the summer, did they? No,
and I think if you make an Allardyce appointment, I think you've got to make it before the end of January if you can, because he's got very specific ideas in mind of types of players that he likes and who fits into the way he wants to play. So it's very much it's not about just bringing in names, and he'll have very specific areas of the pitch. Once he's had a chance to survey it and watched a few videos and done his research, he'll have very specific types of players for specific positions in mind, and he can go and get those targets. It's not just about bringing random signings into the building and improving the quality of the squad and then hoping it all fits together. He'll have very specific ideas in mind of where West Brom are now, what they've got now. So what system do I need to create that gets the best out of what I've got now, but requires as little overhaul as possible to get there to what it is that's going to be effective, what's going to do the job. So he's got a few games to get his head around where he's at now and what he's inherited. And then he's got a few weeks to go and do the business that he needs to do, and then get the points that he requires from February onwards. Much has been made of Sam Allardyce's style of football and his pragmatism and the way he goes about each and every match in the Premier League and even in the Championship as well. He's never really compromised his style, but what do we know about his personality type? Because we know he's not often psychologically profiled. It's all usually focusing on the type of football that he's going to bring. Yeah, I think one word possibly sums him up better than anything is information. He's got very good information. He can retain a lot of information in his own mind. He knows he basically, he's full of himself in a way that he knows that his information is good. And I think he's good at being able to transmit that information to the players. We talk about, he's often lumped in the same bracket as Tony Pulis for the jobs that he does. But Tony Pulis is a manager that likes to get players on the training ground. And he's more almost like an army sergeant, like a drill sergeant, the way he manages them on the pit, on the actual training field. You stand here, exact distances between, how compact your back four is, what the distance is between and it's very regimented where Pulis is concerned. With Allardyce, it's very hands off. He just sits back, very, very comfortable in his own skin that he knows everything he needs to know. And then when it's time when he just kind of fixes the things bit by bit. So he'll see something's going wrong and he'll just say the right thing to the right player at the right time so that it sinks in. I don't think he bombards players with too much information. It's just quality of information at the right times. And it's not this kind, I don't think Allardyce is the sort of manager that comes in and just gets instant results overnight. I think thinking back to survival at Sunderland and Crystal Palace and places where he's been previously, he's taken a few weeks to get going, but he's been totally comfortable. You see him on the touchline, you're thinking, this is not turning yet for Allardyce, but he's just totally comfortable in time. This is why I think he needs the time within a season. And I just think he just slowly, incrementally gets there with depending on the players that he's working with and how quick on the uptake they are, or how much work they need and information they need. I think basically, he just passes on good information, and it takes a little while for it to settle and sink in with the players and the penny to drop what he's asking of them. But because he's so relaxed and he's got this relaxed demeanour, I don't think he ever puts any nervous energy onto the players. I think he's brilliant at shielding players from nervous energy because he's just so comfortable in his own skin and so full of himself and thinks, I know everything I need to know about this. We'll be fine.
Does he work with players individually, or is he more of a collective team effort when it comes to, I know you say he's hands off on the training ground, but when it comes to sort of pre-match and going through the drills, what is he all about the team, or is he more likely to single out an individual, put an arm around the shoulder and say, right, I actually want you to do this job instead?
I think a bit of both. I think he's a systems thinker, so his overview is always about the system, but I think he's very good at the technical details and taking players aside as individuals and telling them what they're doing, what they need to do better to make the system work better. It's not necessarily about developing them as players for their personal careers going forward. It's about, here's what you need to do to fix to fix the system. This is how you fit into the system. Here's how you get the best out of yourself right now. So I think it's a bit of both. I think to the point about the information, he surrounds himself with lots of backroom staff, sports science. I think we're all quite familiar with Sam Allardyce being closely linked to sports science and the diet and nutrition side and the analytics side. He's very much a pioneer. He likes to let everyone know as often as he can that when he was at Bolton, he was a big pioneer of all this kind of stuff. So none of he can just walk into a role in this day and age, and he's totally comfortable with it all. And he's right at the forefront. He used to be right at the forefront. Now he's just another manager, but he knows it all. He's comfortable with all of these aspects, and presumably stays abreast with the latest developments. So it's very much on the collective in the terms of the backroom team. So because he's got so many experts around him in his backroom team, it just allows him to stand back and not really do a lot. Just until he needs to step in and offer the right piece of advice.
So we're not comparing him to Tony Pulis, as you mentioned, two very different characters, although they do get lumped into the same bracket. Who would you compare Big Sam to?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, a few managers really, I suppose, or different elements of different managers. I mean, it's well known that he used to get on well with Sir Alex Ferguson. I think there's a lot of similarities there. I think Ferguson was quite hands-off in the day-to-day. Used to observe from his big window above the training fields on Carrington, and I think Ferguson. Yeah, it is all about it's his way or no way, and it's very much the same with Allardyce. It's anybody who doesn't follow his way of thinking of the way things should be done, well, you don't stand a chance with him. You won't get a look in, and you'll be out the door as quick as anything. So yeah, I guess in that respect, similar to Alex Ferguson, I think they both perceive the game in different ways. I think Allardyce is possibly more modern than Ferguson was, but you could also argue though as well has become a bit more set in his ways. I think you could argue that Ferguson has evolved for his cycles. At Old Trafford more and more. That was what Ferguson was always very good at, was sort of staying with the times. Whereas with Allardyce, I think a little bit his edge came while he was at Bolton because no one else knew sports science. Nowadays, he's just another manager that knows the scientific side of things. So whereas that was a big edge for him in his earlier days in his career, I think it's less so nowadays.
So we hear a lot that he's accused of being a dinosaur. That's a word that is sort of liberally thrown around by sections of the media. But it seems like that is very much not the case in terms of him starting to, make waves at Bolton with the sports science, as you say. Do you think he's already at the stage of looking for the next big thing, or do you think he's kind of settled now and thinks, well, I'll just I got there ahead of everybody else. I know a bit more about it. I'll try and outthink my opposition.
Yeah, I think there's an element to it that he has kind of rested on his laurels a bit over the course of his career, I think. But maybe he just had an edge at Bolton that he was never going to get again to the same degree. So I can see where the accusations come from. I mean, when he gets labelled a dinosaur, it's because he's so set in his ways. He's so set in his thinking in the way things should be. And, you know, if you've got a tried and trusted method that gets you results, it's very, very hard, and certainly very hard for someone of his personality type to reinvent yourself. Why would you want to reinvent yourself? It's like there's a lot of work involved. For people who think and see the game the way he does, there's a hell of a lot of work involved in trying to re-see it in new ways. You know, it's like you're doing away with all the compound effects of everything you've learned over the year if you try to kind of change your mental golf swing, I suppose, is one way you could look at it. You know, he's not going to do that. So he is very set in his ways, but his ways are reinforced over time, and they're still, you know, they're quite timeless. It's not very exciting, but he knows in any situation what the quick answer and solution is to get a better outcome than the way you were doing it. He knows the right way and the wrong way for pretty much every little action within a football match. There's a right way and a wrong way, and he always knows the right way.
And I guess as well, if you're setting your ways, but those ways pretty much get you a job guaranteed at any bottom half Premier League club, at least, you know, once a season, then there's absolutely no problem with them, is there? Clearly, they are working, and boards across the country are looking to appoint Allardyce, particularly when their club is in a little bit of a pickle, as West Brom are at the bottom of the Premier League. So work for Allardyce to do. Just to mention as well, he's been doing a bit of punditting, we'll go with punditry, over the last few weeks. He was on the EFL Quest actually as well, and he was asked about Norwich's penchant for winning by a single goal, and he was very pleased with that. He sort of said, well, at the end of the day, you're collecting 3 points. What is the problem with winning by a single goal? To me, that sounds absolutely perfect. He is very much here and now, isn't he? And you know, 3 points on the board, or a point on the board, I guess, against better opposition is all that matters. He's never really, I certainly can't think of an example recently where he's been given the chance to build. There were thoughts that he might do that at Everton, but of course it all went a bit wrong. But he is very much in the moment, here and now. Let's plan for the next few weeks. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very outcome driven, and I think he's been around the block for long enough now to know that in football you don't really get a chance to build too often, and that, you know, he's made good money out of being you know, someone who you can parachute in and he will keep you in the Premier League. And he's well aware that football is, in fact, money's a very interesting thing, because I've read his autobiography and money's a recurring theme in it. And as in, it's a value metric. It's something by which you measure value by. And whereas most managers see football as a sport, and, you know, some managers see it as an art and something that you create something beautiful on the pitch, Allardyce sees it as business. Football is business. It's worth this amount of money to stay in the Premier League every season. So my value is this. If I can do this job for this club, keep it in the Premier League, well, I know what that job's worth to that club. So I know my value as a manager. So I won't just take any old job in the Championship. I'll just keep waiting for the phone to ring. I'll keep keeping teams in the Premier League and knowing what the value of that is. And he's very results driven in that perspective. So at this stage of his career, I don't see him inclined to want to build anything anyway. He knows where his value is, and if there's a value in keeping teams in the Premier League, you know, if once a club becomes established in the Premier League, then there's less need for an Allardyce and more need for a more aesthetic brand of football, and, you know, you're building a brand then at that stage to distinguish yourself within the Premier League. But when you just want to stay in the Premier League, well, Allardyce can, you know, there's a big difference between Championship money and Premier League money. Allardyce knows that's his niche and that's where his value is. So that's the manager, that's the person, you know, personality, the persona he's created for himself. And he's made a good living out of it and been very successful doing the job he wants to do.
It's funny, isn't it? Because obviously you get the natural social media reaction. And as soon as a club hit a bad run, you get fans going, get him out, get Allardyce in, Allardyce will save us, parachute Allardyce in. He'll keep us up. And then as soon as they get a couple of weeks in and the results start to pick up, like, oh, this is horrible to watch. Oh, no, thank you. And it just seems that with fans, he can't seem to win. But as you mentioned, the money he's made, the clubs that he's had, the reputation that he's got within the game and his standing, he clearly is winning.
Yeah, he doesn't care what you or I think. He doesn't care what the fans of any club think. He doesn't care what the media thinks. He's got, like I say, he's got a high opinion of himself, and fair play to him. If he's comfortable, he knows what he knows, and most people, he sees a lot of other people's opinions as stupid sometimes. He's made no secret of his. He finds it amusing. West Ham fans talking about the West Ham way, Everton fans, what has this club done for so many years? And he just finds it all very amusing and pleases himself. He doesn't need other people to validate him or make him feel like, what type of manager he is, or he's got his own opinion of himself and he's quite happy with it.
Before we go on and talk about our second manager on the podcast today, that'll be Walsall's Daryl Clark, and there's lots to explore there. We'll also take a look at any other business as well at the end of the podcast. Mike, just a very quick mention, if you can, about what is going on with Foxpunter over the festive period. I imagine, giving the match previews that you've been, and the tips that you've been putting out over the last couple of weeks, you'll be continuing to be fairly busy over the festive period.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's basically just a continuation. This is like a nice week break now before Christmas to have, no massive midweek turnaround. So then it'll just be business as usual over the Christmas period. Yeah, but results going well. Tipping performance has been good. So it's all hunky-dory.
Excellent. And look out for lots of ways to get involved with Foxpunter in the new year. We'll be also, of course, back with the podcast, and you can follow us on social media. It's at Foxpunter on Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook too, on foxpunter.com for all of the important information. Right, let's move on to Daryl Clark then of Walsall, a man that I find absolutely fascinating. So, Mike, I'm sure you've had an absolute field day with him over the years. So, to summarise, he was at Bristol Rovers, then, of course, had a bit of a falling out with the board. It all went a bit sour. Turned up at Walsall. Took a while to kind of turn things around. Under pressure somewhat early on, but patience paid off, and Walsall looking much better at this stage of the season. Yesterday involved an absolute thriller against Holden, and despite that, Clark has come out and apologised for the team selection.
Yeah, it's an interesting angle because he is basically, this has been an ongoing theme at Walsall, and as it was at Bristol Rovers, that he's seen as a manager that tinkers with team selection a lot, and it kind of gets his goat a little bit that people have got something to say about his tactics, because it's like he brings so many elements to a club, and so many good things, but it's like picking the team on a Saturday is his thing. It's like he just wants everyone to let me get on with it, because this is kind of where I please myself, and this is where I enjoy myself. Is like thinking of over the dynamics of the tactical dynamics at the weekend, but fans don't tend to have their own opinions when it comes to tactics and are never shy in sharing them. And Clark seems to be a manager that pays attention to what other people are saying about him and his tactics, because he gets quite precious about his tactics. So he apologised this weekend because he went with the same team, because people were saying, why does he never stick with the same team? And he said, normally a 3-game week, on the third game, I'd make 3 or 4 changes. I'd change it up because you need to freshen it up and so on. But everybody's been going on about wanting the same team every week. So I played the same team. So I'm sorry, I listened to you. That's why we were 2-0 down at half-time, because I spent too much, I worried too much about what other people would be saying, that I ended up selecting the wrong team. Next time we'll go with my team, as kind of, But typical of Clark as well, rolled the dice with 4 substitutions at half-time for an incredible turnaround and win the game 4-3.
It's curious, though, isn't it? Because he is regarded as a manager who pretty much calls a spade and has not been shy in putting his thoughts across in the media. And he's good value as well. If you go back and listen to some of the interviews, he's a fascinating listen. But he, like you say, he just seems to take these comments very personally. And he seems to spend time digging around to see what people are making of his team. So there are kind of 2 factors at play there, and they're wrestling with one another, aren't they, constantly?
Yeah, he's basically, because he's a really strong character. The thing that defines him more than anything for me is the mentality of his teams. He fosters this real masculinity among players that it's all about results. It's all about not getting lost in your head within a game. You know, it's very clear what I'm asking you to do in terms of actions on the pitch, similar to what we've just spoken about with Sam Allardyce. He's very specific in his tactical details of what he expects a player to do in a certain scenario and how to behave. So he brings all these solid foundations in this regard, but it's like he's playful when it comes to tactics. He's like the little child when it comes to getting to pick his own team. So it's something he gets a bit precious about, and it's out of keeping with his overall character. So you know that's just why I find it fascinating, because I don't think it's his strength, and I think you can make a comparison. I mean, we'll make a comparison now. There's no two better managers to compare like for like than Daryl Clark and Chris Wilder. And I think what the key difference is between the two managers, and why one is in League Two at the moment and the other's in the Premier League, is, well, for starters, Chris Wilder's had a lot longer in management. So, you know, they're both managers who will get better and better with experience of, you know, on the shop floor, you know, real hands-on, real-world experience. And Chris Wilder's got years on Daryl Clark in this respect. So, he's several years ahead of him. But also he found his 3-5-2. And we're seeing now with Chris Wilder and, you know, losing Jack O'Connell and, you know, things like that, he's not just everything he touches turns to gold. His secret ticket was this 3-5-2 that has taken Sheffield United all the way up to the Premier League. And getting the combination of players right. And, you know, Chris Wilder's had to get through a hell of a lot of players to arrive at a group that he trusts. You know, there's been a big turnover in transfer windows, and it's very similar with Daryl Clark. It can be. And I think that's maybe the thing with Daryl Clark, is that he needs a default system, I think, for his principles to really show themselves. Of, you know, the type of player and the type of dressing room dynamic that he fosters, for it to really show itself, you need that kind of continuity of tactical identity. So I do think it is potentially a shortcoming for him. And I think in the main, he should be looking to find a system that he sticks with and that reinforces itself over time. But he loves the tactical side of the game, and he loves to tweak things, and he loves to treat games as mini projects for himself. You know, so I think this will be the defining thing in his career, is how he handles this issue around tactics and systems over the long term.
Yeah, there was an interesting interview with him in January, I think it was, so certainly earlier in the year. Sky Sports did an article on him, and he spoke there about I think he got rid of 20 players last summer, and it was a huge turnaround at the club, and obviously it took the time to have the effect. But he basically said, how I go about recruiting, and I suspect there's no interference really from higher up. He said, if you're not interested in grafting, if you're not interested in battling, you're not going to give 100% to the cause, then I'm absolutely not interested. And like you said, that plays into the mentality that he wants his teams to go out with.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is with recruitment, it can take you time to work out who can handle Daryl Clark's culture within a club and who can't. And I think that's why there's a high degree of turnover of players, because it's only once you get a player in the building that you truly know if they're willing to go that extra mile, you know, and confidence is a thing where, you know, like you say about players going into their own heads. I think sometimes some players struggle it's not just about the physical demands of you know, how hard you work physically within games, but it's about mentally how long you can stay switched on, and that's that stamina aspect of not going into your own head and starting to worry about things when things aren't going your way. And I think it's only after so long, because he can be quite brutal in his post-match press conferences. When he talks about players, he can call players out, he can, you know, call the team out, he can be really brutally honest with some of the things he's got to say. And only a certain type of player can handle that. You know, and I'd say possibly the minority. You know, I'd say most players would let it affect them on some level. But it either toughens you up and you stay with Clark, or you get moved on. And this is why there can be a quite high turnover of players. But once a manager like Daryl Clark gets a dressing room that's full of the right sort of characters for him, they can really take some stopping because, you talk about mental strength. You talk about Sheffield United again, going up 2 divisions within 3 seasons. There's no real limits. There's no real ceiling because you're not scared of, or you don't get like moving up to a new level doesn't become a big obstacle for you mentally. It's just, meeting the demands physically, because mentally you can handle almost anything.
Yeah, we saw that with Bristol Rovers, didn't they? Their route up to League One, basically with the same squad, 1 or 2 additions, of course. But once he'd done the business that he needed to, he largely kept that same base of players. And actually, some of those players have now followed him to Walsall. So clearly, they enjoy playing for him. He likes what they give the team, and he prefers to surround himself with familiar characters. But Walsall have also brought a few younger players through recently, and clearly, as you point out there, Mike, they must have the right mentality. They must be able to cope with the demands and the fact that Clark is probably constantly on their back.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's the thing is to be able to bring young players through. I think you might say, is this manager a player that promotes youth or doesn't promote youth? In Daryl Clark's case, it's, well, are the youth that I've got available to me, are they strong enough mentally? Because if they're strong enough mentally, I'll make them better players. I'll make them the players they need to be, but they've got to be able to handle my way of managing them. So, yeah, I mean, that's been a nice bonus. At the same time, when he first came in, I think he needed some of these players from Bristol Rovers that had worked with him before, because I think initially you need some standard bearers who set the tone of what's expected. And, I think some of the players he brought in necessarily weren't the most, I think Walsall fans would have looked at some of those signings and thought, well, what do they really add, on the pitch? They don't look that great, but it's what's going on behind the scenes and the standards that they're setting in terms of resetting the culture and giving birth to something new. I think those players were essential early on for Clark, and I think now we're finally now beginning to see what a Daryl Clark team looks like once it gets going, and it's a team that he can put on the pitch that he's happy with.
We talked about the short-termism with Sam Allardyce earlier on, didn't we? We talked about how he doesn't really want the chance to build now, particularly at his stage of his career. But Daryl Clark, albeit, likes to call players out, as we know, tends to like to build, and he tends to like to sort of gather momentum and work on things. He's talked about, going back to that same interview that I referenced earlier, he said in that interview, it's been nice to build something here at Walsall. It was never going to be an immediate turnaround. I was never coming in expecting to get us promotion in our first season. And then he goes on to say afterwards, well, I'm never really happy, but I'm getting there. So clearly he's building up, he's building. And like you say, they could take some stopping now, couldn't they?
Yeah, I think a key thing with Clark is that this kind of a little bit goes back to what I said about Neil Harris a few weeks back, in that in terms of stamina, mentality and stamina. And I think the same performance at the beginning of the season, if you can maintain your levels throughout a 46-game season and you're not letting the psychology affect you later in the season, there's a lot of points and a lot of success to be had at the business end of a season for a team that just gives that 8 out of 10 performance every week, doesn't get affected by what this game means relative to the table, or doesn't get tired, is physically still offering the same with it over a 90 minutes, running the same distances. All of these variables, all of these factors are on an even keel from game 1 to game 46. Then they really begin to count at the back end of a season when other teams are starting to tire mentally, some are starting to tire physically. These are the factors, and it's kind of, it's a little bit of a hare and tortoise thing. I think that they're just left standing at the end of a season, and I think you'll find, you look through Daryl Clark's career, nearly every season, certainly at Bristol Rovers, the second half of the season was always better than the first half of the season. And yet the standards he's setting day to day and the work he's doing on the training ground isn't really changing. It's settling more with the players as the season develops. Certainly the newer players are beginning to understand what's being asked of them more and more. But also the standards are being maintained, and, never feeling the pressure of, the psychology side at the back end of a season, but never getting tired physically either, because of, the team are conditioned to, it's more about stamina rather than pace and explosion.
And final question on Daryl Clark then. We know that it's all about the team and fostering that mentality. Does he do much work in sort of trying to counter the opposition? Does he watch videos? Does he analyze the opponents? Or is it basically, I'll concentrate on what I'm doing here. I'll concentrate on the team that I put out and the work we've done on the training ground. And that'll be enough to just hopefully see us over the line, regardless of who we play.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the point about him with tactics and team selection. I think he loves the studying the opposition. He treats every game as a mini project. And it's almost like he comes into a club and says, right, I'm going to give you all of this for nothing. The new culture, the mentality, I'll sort all of that effortlessly. Give me time, give me the turnaround of players that I need. I will get you this rock solid mentality. I'll get you this team that performs consistently and get stronger as the season goes on. But in the meantime, can you just let me have my little thing that I get to tweak from game to game and treat every game as my own little mini project? It's kind of like that's almost the agreement you have to have with Daryl Clark. And I think for him to become a majorly successful manager, he has to strike upon some formula that he sticks with to some degree. But yeah, I do think he loves to study the opposition. He loves to, treat these games as little mini projects and sit down from a Monday to a Friday and think, right, how are we going to approach this game? I think this is where he gets his real buzz, is the build up to a game and testing himself mentally against the next opposition.
Well, the good news for Daryl Clark is he's had plenty of chances to test himself and pick team lineups with the fixtures having come thick and fast. He's done it twice a week for most of the season so far. And as we know, he needs a chairman as well. I think is going to give him plenty of time to build. We'll keep our eye on Walsall during the second half of the season and see how the Saddlers juggernaut gets on. Right, before we leave you, any other business, and I believe, Mike, we're heading to the far coast again for this.
Yeah, Joey Barton has cut Ched Evans loose, and it sounds like it's been an ongoing thing. This hasn't just happened overnight, but it's really interesting the way that Barton's dealt with this, because it kind of goes back to the podcast we did on Joey Barton about honouring individuals and people's right to be an individual. It's kind of like Ched Evans has had a number of misdemeanors behind the scenes, and Barton's let a lot of it go, and now he's just reached a point as like, he's not slagged Evans off in the media. He's not angry. It's like, yeah, you've got your right to be a clown, or to be disruptive. You're perfectly entitled to be that. We're all entitled to be individuals, but there reaches a point, and I think now it's time for you to get off the bus. And it's like, there's no anger. There's no, people think that, you get on the wrong side of Joey Barton. I think this is evidence that Joey Barton cuts players a bit of slack, along the way, but then reaches a point and it's like, right, we go our separate ways because, I've put up with it for too long and I just think it's time for you to go now. It's not, he's not getting angry. He's not, it's not a sudden reaction that's come out of nowhere. It's just been a totting up process by the sounds of it. And it's like, right, now you can go, and he's not said anything that demeans Ched Evans' character. I think that's the key thing. It's like, everybody's entitled to be, because Joey Barton's made so many mistakes in his life. And I think that's his mindset, is everybody's entitled to make their own mistakes in life. So it's like very amicable, but at the same time damning as far as Ched Evans is concerned in terms of finding another club, because it sounds like he's a bit of a problem behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. But there'll undoubtedly be plenty of suitors for Ched Evans as well. Plenty of clubs who are looking for a League One striker, certainly, who will bag a few goals for them. And Ched Evans may find himself with a few offers on the table. But yeah, Joey Barton still with plenty of firepower at Fleetwood as well. So I don't think he'll be losing too much sleep over his departure. And if you do want to go back and listen to our Joey Barton podcast, he's paired with Steve Evans. That is in episode 2 of Manager Profiling. And you can go back and listen to that, of course, over the Christmas period. Right, Mike, thank you very much as ever. We will be back, won't we, on the 9th of January. We wish you obviously a good festive season, and hopefully all of our listeners do as well. And we look forward to your company again in January, Mike.
Yeah, all the best. Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas to all the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Merry Christmas to everyone, and we'll see you again in, believe it or not, 2021.